Hey everybody, thanks for coming back to the next part of my 2021 recap. Also, quick addendum. I also saw Bliss, which was released straight to Amazon Prime, and it wasn't very good. Starring Owen Wilson and Selma Hayek. Man, you just need to be in these videos, don't you? But starring Owen Wilson and Selma Hayek, which is the story of a guy who finds out that the world he's living in is actually a simulation. Although, is it actually a simulation? One of those. The big problem with the movie is that although the general cinematography and performances are all good, the way that those performances are directed and the way that the movie is directed, there is no reasonable way that the utopian world that is outside the simulation is real. It just didn't come together. It was trying so hard to make you go, is it real or isn't it? It put too much stuff into the utopian world that played into the dystopian world that was supposed to be the simulation, that it wasn't believable that the dystopian world was a simulation. It just didn't pull off what it was trying to do. So, meh. No reason to see that one. That being said, now we are moving on to all of the television that I watched this year. Although, I feel like I left a lot out. I didn't do a good job of recording everything that I watched this year. So, I'm just going to get a smattering of the stuff that I know I watched and the stuff that I more recommend. Some of it was definitely stuff from previous years, but I'm going to mention anyway, just to fill out the list a little bit. So, we're going to start with the biggest things I watched this year were what a lot of people watch. I watched a lot of the Marvel stuff on Disney+. Starting at the beginning of the year with WandaVision. WandaVision was great until they fumbled the ending a little bit. While I did enjoy the ending, I think it worked, there was a lot of stuff that was very, very clumsy. They nailed the different sitcoms that they were parodying so well. And the ongoing mystery was so well handled, especially in those first few episodes. It was one of the most compelling bits of television that I saw all year. It really is incredible what they actually did accomplish. The performances were great. All of the ways they kind of played with the meta-narrative of the story was really fun. You know, and the interaction of the people within the illusion and the people outside of the illusion. I should probably say minor spoilers for everything, because you can only talk about so much, but hitting those stylistic versions of all those different sitcoms and tying those stories into a larger narrative about loss and mourning just was incredibly well done. It just is a little disappointing that the ending turned into a big action sequence, which was good. I liked it, and the overall way she won was great, but it just felt like the wrong way to end that story. Also, they'll never understand what you gave up for them. It's like she tortured these people for weeks, which is the biggest complaint a lot of people have, is that they're treating Wanda like a martyr at the end of the story, but it's like she did some truly horrific things to those people. There are entire movies devoted to, or quite frankly, other Marvel stories about how what she did is existential torture. Specifically, me and my wife are watching Jessica Jones again, and it's literally about how abusive that kind of mind control is, and it felt a little bit out of place to be like, oh, you gave up so much at the end of it. That being said, really enjoyed it. The next one that came out was Loki. Also, really loved Loki. I know some people have some complaints with it. There are some weirdness with the writing. Specifically, the love interest is another Loki, which is really messed up. But the way that they handled the time travel, and had to go grab the spray bottle. My cat was chewing on my tape dispenser. As a way to introduce the beginning of the multiverse, really loved what they did with Loki. I'm curious to see what they're going to do next with where they left it, especially with everything else that's moving forward. It does also kind of play into one of my biggest problems with the Marvel stuff right now, is nothing really ends, but I'll get to that in a second. Tom Hiddleston as Loki is genuinely the best part of the Marvel movies overall. He is wonderfully snarky, just absolutely compelling to watch, and is perfectly cast. So it only made sense to give him his own series, and the idea of giving him his own series as a abnormality in the timeline was great. Seeing him go through the process of figuring out all the stuff that's going on with the timeline was really, really interesting. And seeing the Time Variance Authority in what they are and what their mission was also really, really cool. I was kind of hoping for more of a adventure thing than something that tied in more directly into everything else that's going on, especially since some of the ways that it ties in doesn't really make sense. Like, we had a whole thing in Avengers Endgame about all of the threads of fate that were going out from the events in that, but then you have Loki where there's a whole authority that's literally about keeping one timeline in place, so that isn't actually true. Unless it's, like I said, unless the timeline issues are all happening in weird whatever. Other than that, I love the way that they handled Loki. I love the fact that they basically figured out a way for him to have his entire arc from all of the movies leading him from where he was at Thor 1 to Avengers Infinity War, all in one episode of TV, was incredibly well handled. Owen Wilson was incredibly fun as his partner who, is believing in him and trying to figure out what's going on while also figuring out what's going on behind the scenes. The various mysteries in place were great, and the reveal of the one who watches was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what they're going to be doing with him moving forward, especially knowing that he is going to be a bigger part of the MCU moving forward. I really enjoyed it, highly recommend it. The most recent Disney Plus Marvel series was Hawkeye, and Hawkeye was... Oh, I totally forgot. No, let's go. Sorry, kind of dial it back. I don't remember if it came before or after Loki, but Falcon and the Winter Soldier also happened, so we watched that. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was just okay. I wish it could have been better. It did bring up a lot of interesting ideas and aspects of how the Marvel Universe deals with certain subjects, specifically bringing up issues of race in an interesting way, even though it was a little underserved. The Flag Smashers were a really interesting concept. The way they're playing with the various ways that the blip is affecting people on the ground is really cool. Like talking about how Monica Rambeau in WandaVision, blipped in and out, and her dealing with getting back into everything. Especially after how Spider-Man Far From Home kind of just glosses over it. Or seeing how in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you have an entire group of people who are dealing with the fact that they were forced to become refugees, essentially, and the world came together in the wake of that all of a sudden you have all these people coming back, and the world's going back to where it was, and now all these people are getting displaced again. Why are you so silly? Oh, was a really, really great concept. And the bringing in the new Captain America was also a really cool concept, and I'm curious to see where that character moves forward after this, just because of how that played out, and they're slowly bringing in a new villainess in the form of Julia Louis-Dreyfus. We're not sure what her motivations are yet, but it was nice to see Zemo come back, even though he was underserved. It was nice to see all the stuff between Falcon and the Winter Soldier was great. Their banter was wonderful. Seeing Winter Soldier deal with the consequences of his actions in the other movies was all really well handled, but everything just felt a little lacking. It felt like a little underbaked. It felt a little underdone, but it was good. The stuff that was good in there was good. It never felt like it quite reached the heights of other Marvel projects. Yeah. So, and then that brings us to Hawkeye, which I feel like is the slightly better version of that, although it still felt a little shoehorned. The addition of Kate Bishop was wonderful. It's interesting seeing... Hawkeye was great because it showed a different layer to, particularly a very underserved character. The addition of Kate Bishop as a character who genuinely appreciates and idolizes Hawkeye, who, like I said, has been a generally underserved character. Like, he's a really interesting character, being the only normal person in all of this. He was just very good at shooting arrows. It's interesting to see his take on everything that's going on, especially in this. They deal a little bit with his multiple forms of PTSD, although it's pretty underplayed. It's not a lot. And then dealing with the consequences of his own actions when he went dark. And seeing him through the eyes of Kate Bishop, who is a fan who idolized him for helping to save the city despite being a normal person, was great. Seeing them play off each other was funny. Somebody who is super, super idealistic but doesn't understand the ramifications and the weight of her actions in trying to be a hero and catching up. And so him having to teach someone was also very fun. Some of the cameos and additions in this were really great, just to know that stuff could be happening moving forward, especially since the new villain they introduced, Echo, will be getting her own series, and she has a connection to an old Marvel character that is honestly I would argue, the single best performance in any of the Marvel projects so far. I can't wait to see him come back more. I hope he comes back more. It's nice to know that there's aspects of that moving forward, even if Echo herself was kind of a lackluster and underwhelming character in and of herself. And that gets me to my biggest criticism. While the heroes were really well served in this story, the villains came off as a little too safe, a little too cartoony. The Tracksuit Mafia, while having some wonderfully funny bits, were a little bit ridiculous, as well as calling in the help of the cosplayers pretty early on. Hawkeye meets a group of cosplayers for reasons. They end up helping him and basically becoming heroes in their own right. It was kind of weird and felt out of place, but overall, that being said, this show was very, very fun, and I do hope it gets another season with where it ended off, but it'll be hard to say. I don't know how many people actually watched it. I haven't heard a whole lot of people coming away from it going, oh my god, it was so much, I loved it, and it's like, I really enjoyed it, and I want to see more. Jeremy Renner is a great actor who has been kind of underserved in the Marvel movies so far. Like, every time they give him something to do, it's usually pretty great. So I hope to see more of that in the future. Okay, so now moving on past Marvel into other areas of Disney, I do want to make a quick shout out to Chip 'n Dale Park Life. I grew up with a couple of, man, all of my cats today. I grew up with a couple of tapes of old Chip 'n Dale shorts, so to see Park Life basically bring back the old school Chip 'n Dale dynamic of they're just a couple of chipmunks was wonderful. It's a wonderful series of shorts told entirely through visual storytelling. It's a nice combination of new school animation and old school sentimentality as far as what the stories that they're telling and how they're telling it. Just absolutely wonderful. Could not recommend it more. Definitely, I recommend that one heartily. Chip 'n Dale Park Life is a wonderful new addition. Going into the last of the Disney projects, saw Mandalorian Season 2 last year, and it was good. The first season of The Mandalorian felt like an almost there kind of season. Like, it was good, but it wasn't great. But I liked that they were telling different stories within the Star Wars universe. Like, my biggest complaint with the movies is that they keep coming back to the same storylines over and over and over again, and there's a much bigger universe to tell. In the second season, it really brought it from like a show that was a 7.5 to an 8, like solid but not like amazing, to a show that is a 9. It really hit all the marks it needed to hit this season. So much fun. Really delved into that era of Star Wars and, that in between, and all the people dealing with the aftermath of the previous movies, because it takes place in between episode 6 and episode 7. So seeing the ground level ways those stories affected the general population of the galaxy was really interesting. And it was a series of fun, well-made, interesting stories that are honestly some of the best anything that Star Wars has done in a while. The Bill Burr episode in Season 2, the joke going around is Bill Burr had a better arc as an ex-stormtrooper than Finn had in the entirety of the new Star Wars trilogy. And it's true. So that story in that episode of him just getting a hint of what he went through and what he regrets from his time as a stormtrooper is honestly one of the best bits of anything that Star Wars has ever done. That episode alone elevated Season 2 above most of what else they put out. Now, there were some low points. I haven't watched any of the new Boba Fett series, but I've been hearing it's kind of weak. And it's not surprising because that episode of the show was kind of weak. But other than that, I would say that was the only low point. The rest of the season was just, it was solid episode after solid episode after solid episode, all saying something. The only complaint I would have is where it ended felt kind of weird. What happens to Grogu at the end, especially because if you know what happens in the movies, it's like there's an implication there that unless they resolve it by the next season, it's going to be bad. But it is cool to see. But yeah, Mandalorian 2, great. I think that's the end of the Disney stuff. Yes. So now we're going to start talking about some of the other things that we watched. I think I can say I watched The Masked Singer. It's fun for what it is. We'll just say that. I like The Masked Singer. It's fun for what it is. Next up on the list is the tragic Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. Oh my god. That show is so good. It literally has one of the best pilots of television that I've ever seen, and I cannot recommend the show enough. Unfortunately, after season 2, which is great, it is a good, 2 seasons of TV. You can watch it. The only problem is it ends on a cliffhanger that doesn't necessarily retroactively screw up anything else, but does make me go, oh, I wish we had more. But those 2 seasons in and of themselves are great. I just wish they weren't canceled. The general storyline is a woman goes to get a CAT scan because her father has degenerative neural disease, so she wants to get herself checked out. And somehow, due to things that happen, she is suddenly able to hear people's inner monologues in the form of song. And they use that technique so well throughout the show. It is so much fun. I laughed, I cried, the whole shebang. It's great. I highly recommend Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. It's only 2 seasons now. That's probably where it's going to be moving forward. They were shopping around, but I don't think anybody picked it up. But highly recommend it. Watch that. Next, as another, I caught up this year, although it technically ended last year. Just can't sing the praises of Steven Universe enough. Cartoon Network animated show aimed more at kids and young adults. They are, 12-minute episodes, but Steven Universe is honestly a true testament to what storytelling can do, especially when you're telling those stories to young children and adults. That show, while being over the top and goofy and weird, manages to tell extremely mature and adult storylines with just a thin layer of metaphor in a way that children and young adults can understand and appreciate. Not to mention the fact that it builds its lore in an incredibly slow and methodical nature. Now, the most recent stuff, which was after finally seeing the final season, because it finally went up on HBO, and then watching Steven Universe Future, which was the most recent stuff, what I will say is Universe becomes a little bit more heavy-handed. Part of that is now, because you're dealing with Steven Universe, who is now 16 instead of 12, where he is for most of the original series, so he can be a little bit more direct with the stuff he's dealing with. The last season felt a little sloppy. The final season of the show felt like it rushed a big storyline, getting to the end, basically oh, we have to wrap up all the mysteries and stuff that we've been building for seasons. And this season also felt a little rushed. There were a bunch of things that they set up as a new status quo that they then just abandoned pretty early on in favor to tell a completely different story, which was fine, and that story ended on a really good note, although considering that the way that they solved it is the way that they were trying to solve it essentially earlier, and it wasn't working. Felt a little bit half-assed, but still good. Laughed, cried. Seriously, that show probably makes me cry more than anything else on television. It is so good. It will probably go down as one of the all-time greatest animated shows of all time. Steven Universe. So let's see. So let's go into some other stuff that another thing that I caught up on, which was Doom Patrol. I was a little bit late to Doom Patrol. I started Doom Patrol Season 1 as Season 3 was just beginning. So did a lot of catching up on that slowly over the year. Doom Patrol is a really hard sell because it is a really weird character-driven superhero story when everybody expects superhero stories to be much more plot and action-driven. It also doesn't help that it is diving into as much of the weirdest aspects of the DC universe that they possibly can. The show, season to season, is very mixed in quality. The first season starts off kind of slow, but then gets really good by the end. Well, I should say, it had an amazing pilot, and then a lot of filler, and then a good ending. And then the second season was much better overall with how they were handling the various elements that were going on with some of the new characters they introduced. Season 3 was the setup was interesting, and the middle was a lot of exposition trying to get to a point, and then ended on a really, really high note and a new status quo that will be interesting moving forward. But it's like there was such a lull. Overall, I would say it was a pretty weak season. But the highs are high. So the beginning and the ending are great. And how these characters are dealing with everything they've got going on. Everybody's character arc, where they're really now this season, like the first few seasons were, couple seasons were them figuring out what their problems were, and this season was much more dealing with those problems in the aftermath of their actions, for better or for worse. The only major complaint I have is that Crazy Jane's acting can be a little bit over the top, even for a character named Crazy Jane, and the same can be said for Robot Man, which the biggest problem with Robot Man is that Brendan Fraser is not the person in the suit, and you can tell the actions of the person in the suit do not match the voice, especially when Brendan Fraser is giving a fun but super, super over-the-top vocal performance to deal with it, and you have somebody who feels like they're super underacting it. It really came to a head in this season of being super awkward, especially when he's dealing with his particular story arc this season, which were, because he's a human brain in a robot body, and that human brain is starting to have issues. It came off as really, really tonally dissonant. That, and the other major thing is because it's an HBO show and they can be edgy, they usually push that edginess to the point of it being like, do you need to say fuck so much? I mean, do you though? It's because there were some conversations where it was literally like every third word, and it just felt lazy and weird. But overall, I really like Doom Patrol. I enjoy the fact that it is something different. It is not a traditional superhero show, and they do get into some weird stuff. But yeah, it is a tough sell for anyone. I can't recommend it outright, but if you're in the mood for something weird and you like things that are weird and dumb, but at the same time can be emotionally poignant, Doom Patrol is great. I'm probably going to start Titans soon to try to catch up on that. I've heard that started off really weak, but got a lot better as it went along. Inside Job on Netflix. Haven't finished that yet, but if you watch a trailer for it, you wouldn't be mistaken to look at that and go, it just feels like a Rick and Morty clone. And while it does have a similar style and sense of humor, it is much less nihilistic and definitely has its own voice in what it's doing. So for those of you who don't know, Inside Job is an adult animated sitcom about people working at Cognito Inc., which is a corporation responsible for most of the conspiracy theories in the world. You know, lizard people, mind control, Illuminati, all of that stuff. That's Cognito Inc. And it plays off of what would be some traditionally like silly dynamics and then just rolls with them in ways that other shows don't. And specifically, like, they introduce right away the main character Regan, who is a woman who is a scientist and the daughter of one of the founders, who has since been disgraced and pushed out of the company. Initially, she is ready to take over her division, but they choose to instead pair her up with a guy who has literally no qualifications but is really charismatic. And initially it feels like that's going to be the mode of conflict for the show, but instead they play with it in being like they both realize that they actually have faults and that they build off of each other really well, and they end up having a good friendship as co-heads. It's stuff like that where it's like it doesn't go exactly where you think it's going to go. Right, Riff Raff? And that being said, I think it is the most laughs per minute of any show I have watched this year. It is so funny with how they play with the ideas of conspiracy theory and modern life and the ridiculousness of conspiracy theories. Like, the fact that they do have all these things that they control and do, but then they make fun of flat earthers. Like, flat earth is stupid. So, a lot of fun. Alright, so I'm just gonna come out and admit it. If my hair looks different, that's because much time after I filmed this later, I remembered a whole bunch of stuff that I had seen and loved. So, yeah. New day, same shirt, because I'm a professional. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about, we'll start with Glenn Howerton comedies. First off, I finally caught up on AP Bio this winter. I was a couple of seasons behind, since it moved to Peacock. AP Bio is delightful. For those who haven't seen it, AP Bio follows a former philosophy professor who is forced to go to back to his hometown of Toledo, Ohio, after he is disgraced from Harvard University, and his mom dies and he inherits her house. And as a way to make money, he starts teaching AP Bio at the local high school. The problem, of course, being that he doesn't really know much about AP Bio and is really just using it as a way to force his students to help him get revenge on the people around him. And then slowly but surely he ends up forming relationships with the students, he ends up forming relationships with the different teachers, and actually starts to kind of enjoy being in Toledo, Ohio, and appreciating parts of small town life. It is a very fun show. Glenn Howerton as the lead brings just the right amount of charm, malevolent glee, and manages to make a character who is genuinely unlikable from the go. Over time, you kind of start to love him. It also helps that he is surrounded by a very, very talented group of younger actors playing the students in his classroom. Almost all of them get something to do, and a couple of them are massive standouts. Particularly the girl with the glasses, you'll know the one. She steals every scene that she's in, and they've given her more and more to do as the show goes on. She's definitely the fan favorite, but everybody gets some kind of a decent arc in an episode. The last couple of seasons, though, because the show went to Peacock, are definitely truncated. It feels like some of the actors kind of came and went because the show ended up getting shorter and maybe they weren't making enough money, but there are a couple of characters that leave very suddenly, and it feels like they didn't get enough to do with those characters, so it just kind of feels abrupt. And the person that our teacher is dating in the final season, not as good as the previous one. She's just not as compelling of a character, but overall still good. Has some great episodes. It's not as strong as previous seasons, but there are a couple of standouts. In particular, they did an episode where it is 12 minutes of previously ons that you've never seen before, about 3 minutes of the episode, and about another 12 minutes of next time on that just wrap up the story. It was really funny how they handled that situation. But yeah, overall, I really enjoy AP Bio. Great show, definitely worth checking out if you've got Peacock, or if you've got a free trial, just binging through that whole series pretty quickly. And then to follow that up with another Glenn Howerton comedy, finally caught up over the winter on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The most recent season, it's another bit of a mixed bag. It does have some really clever, really funny moments in it. The episode where they're trying to figure out where to go on vacation is great, and then the season ends with a 3-episode arc in Ireland, and that was clever. It was fun. Seeing Mac deal with his identity issues was great. Frank just keeps ramping up to 11, especially with his relationship with Charlie after the events play out in that season. And it's also nice, that show does a good job of reminding you every once in a while that the cast are actually really good actors. The end of the previous season, Mac Finds His Pride is a good example of both Mac and Frank getting really good acting moments. And this season has a monologue near the end with Charlie that legitimately made me cry. Overall, yeah, it was a solid season, but far from the best. It's Always Sunny is consistently good. You know what you're getting out of a season of it. It's just some of it feels like it's spinning its wheels at this point, but the car is still staying together. So I still love that show. Every once in a while I'll go back and watch some classic episodes. That's the closest I have to an Office type show for me. But yeah, Always Sunny, still good. Another one that I watched really, really late was Shadow and Bone on Netflix. When it came out, I had heard good things, and I watched it, and it was good things. I think it had a couple of things going against it that stopped it from hitting like the highest heights of the shows that I loved this year. While I liked the universe and how it played out, it did feel kind of derivative of a whole bunch of different projects. The things that it did differently, I liked. It just did a very good job of being what it was. Based on a novel of the same name, it takes place in a alternate history, I want to say like late 1800s. It's heavily inspired by Russian colonialism and involves a young woman who finds out that she's the chosen one and her dealing with that but not really wanting to be the chosen one. Basically taking place in a world that is a country engulfed in civil war, but they're trying to control the country while simultaneously being cut off by a giant cloud of shadow I forget that, I think they call it a tear, if I remember, that is very difficult to cross because it is inhabited by lots of monsters. It is also followed by a group of criminals who are trying to capture said chosen one in order to get a bounty that will help them with their other issues that they're having back in their hometown. There is an undercurrent plot of one of these characters having a grudge against one of the other major criminals in this town and wanting to get revenge, and they haven't given you enough of that yet. They just give you hints of his backstory that has me really intrigued with how they're going to approach that moving forward. Like I said, some of the aspects of it are very derivative. The magic users in this universe are all element-based. They do use some of those in some clever ways, but for the most part, it's what you expect with fire, water, wind type magic users. But that being said, it is very fun, good acting, definitely worth a watch. Really intrigued to see where they're going to go moving forward.
And Side 1.